I want to bring in our chief international correspondent, Christiane Amanpour. Christiane, it's the middle of the night here on the east coast of the United States, but much of the rest of the world is now waking up to a brand new reality. What do you anticipate the reaction will be?
Well, you can already see some of it coming in fast and furious. There are criticisms from the usual suspects, obviously Russia, obviously the Syrian regime, but the obvious, what we've been reporting, what you've been reporting, is that President Trump and the Trump administration had been talking to Russia, to others before they launched this attack. And yes, we're going to see probably a few days, a few weeks of how to go forward from this. But obviously, this is very, very significant. It is apparently, according to the administration, a one-off for the moment. It was done, as you heard from Nancy Pelosi, in a proportionate reaction to the violation of international law by using weapons of mass destruction. And the fact that it is the first time ever that the United States has actually stood up and taken a stance and tried to prevent this kind of violation of international law by the Assad regime is very significant. And there's always been this conflicting analysis about what's happening in Syria. People mix up the fight against terror with the fight against Assad. Assad is the reason for the rise of ISIS. So trying to fight ISIS without making sure that Assad doesn't complicate the picture, along with his allies, Russia and Iran, has always been something that's been very hard for the US administration, many of its allies in the past, to get their heads around. So many people around the rest of the world believe that Assad and his use of targets that destroy civilians, and including the use of banned international substances like chemical weapons, is part, if not the main problem in Syria, and has been for many, many years. Having a better relationship with Russia is something all the US administrations have tried to do. But under President Putin, it has gone awry at every turn. President Bush, W. Bush, tried to do it. He, remember, very famously looked into the eyes of Vladimir Putin and saw his soul. And things were going okay for a while until there was the Iraq War. And that ruptured the relationship between the Bush administration and Vladimir Putin. And then the Obama administration tried to reset. And that was sort of going kind of all right for a while until the Libya intervention in March of 2012. And then that ruptured that relationship. And then Russia decided to violate international law itself and invade Crimea and annex it, and then to interfere in eastern Ukraine. And that has put Russia on the wrong side of international law and history at the moment. So it is an incredible, complicated situation. There's no doubt about it. It's very interesting to hear the readout that the administration spoke to Russia, informed them what was going to happen through this deconfliction channel, and we don't know any others, but you know, they weren't in the way as far as we know. And we're going to see how they work this out, because this is a real issue now that all sides have to deal with.
The U.S.-Russian relationship now has taken a very surprising, very negative turn.
You know, let's see what happens. Let's just see. The United States has the most powerful military in the world. It is the richest country in the world. Russia has by no means the ability to counter the United States currently under the conventional weapons, capability that it has. It just doesn't. It is true that in Syria it has incredibly potent and powerful and the newest range of anti-aircraft systems, but it didn't use them, and it was told about what was going to happen according to the readouts that we're getting from the administration. The Syrians do not have the capability to deter the United States military. They just don't. They have been degraded. They don't have that capability, and that is why, you know, this was able to be done. But yes, and actually I think what's going to be fascinating is to hear what President Trump and President Xi talk about. Remember, China has also vetoed and not really been pro this kind of action over the last years. And there in Florida, we've got the two leaders, the two most powerful leaders in the world, the President of the United States and the President of China, about to sit down and continue their conversations after this strike. That's going to be really interesting, because President Trump has also on his plate how to deal with North Korea's rising nuclear threat. So all of this comes at a very, very crucial moment.
Those photos clearly had an impact on his thinking.
Well, I think absolutely. I was on with Wolf now more than 24 hours ago, right after President Trump made his statements alongside King Abdullah in the Rose Garden. And I was really struck, and I said it, that this seemed to be a much more, a very changed and very shaken President Trump, and a very determined President Trump. You heard what he said. Basically, it had completely changed his attitude to Syria and to Assad. And all of this, what the president was saying at that moment in the Rose Garden, was amplified by the rest of his administration. You had Nikki Haley, the UN ambassador at the UN, just shortly before the president, saying that this is unacceptable, that the UN needs to respond. I mean, you couldn't even get the UN, along with Russia and China, to agree to a resolution condemning an act of war by a government which signed on, we've just learned tonight, to the Chemical Weapons Convention. You couldn't even get them to condemn it, much less to stop Assad from doing it again. So you had that. You had Vice President Pence later in the night saying all options are on the table. You had Rex Tillerson confirming that they had no doubt that Assad had launched this chemical attack. And then you had the rest of the sort of evidence coming out yesterday at the Pentagon confirming that, that these planes, they had tracked them with the radar and infrared and had figured out where they had come from and how they had launched this attack near Idlib. So yes, it was a moment where, you know, the policy for a moment changed on that very important dime of this violation of international law. And we're not saying, and I don't think anybody believes, that this is an ongoing attack, that this is a precursor to an invasion of Syria or to regime change in Syria or anything like that. I think they've said it, that this is it for the moment. Let's see what happens next. But this is designed to deter a tyrant who has, for now going into its 7th year, been responsible for the deaths of nearly 500,000 people and for 12 million refugees, most of those circling around trying to figure out where to live inside Syria, millions of them outside Syria, putting pressure on American allies like Turkey, like Jordan, not to mention Lebanon, and upending politics all over the West as well. This is a massive, massive crisis that the West has not dealt with in the last 7 years, and it still needs to be dealt with.
You think it's too far-fetched, Christiane, to think that this airstrike that was launched against the Syrian targets today, it obviously sends a powerful message from the Trump administration to people in Syria and elsewhere in the Middle East, but is it too far-fetched to think it also sends a message to North Korea?
Well, that's what I was saying. I think that it's very important, the action that was taken, if you're talking about also having North Korea, you know, try to figure out how to deal with North Korea. Now, you know, there has been some loose talk about maybe a military option, or we'll take care of it ourselves, or whatever it is. North Korea is obviously a much, much more complex situation because it actually does have nuclear weapons and it is trying to perfect the delivery system. You see almost regularly, weekly, North Korea has been firing ballistic missiles. Most of them have been landing in the Sea of Japan and in that area, threatening American bases, threatening American allies, and then threatening North Korea, Pyongyang, to develop the intercontinental ballistic missile capability that would, if they could, militarize and mount a nuclear warhead on it, could threaten the United States. So the policy of the United States so far and the rest of its allies has actually not worked. The policy of sanctions, the policy of refusing to talk to North Korea, the policy of trying to outsource it to China has actually not worked. Objectively speaking, it hasn't worked because now North Korea has nuclear devices and, as I said, is trying to perfect the delivery system. So a new policy has somehow to be devised. And that is why the meeting between President Trump and President Xi right now, today in Mar-a-Lago, is going to be of vital and crucial significance. Of course, President Trump would want to talk about all the other things he campaigned on, the trade surplus, what he calls the unfair trade practices, etc., etc. But, you know, it's coming at a time when the foreign policy security aspect of it is now front and center on the table.